Sometimes when you're driving down the road all by yourself, you begin to hear a voice that tells you need to look around, pay attention. Maybe something isn't quite right. That voice is me. It's the voice of Gord. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. A little quick intro here for you before we get to our next guest, Mr. Kim Wylie, who is behind the sort of Facebook and advocacy group up in Saskatchewan called Trucking is a Trade. We have a fairly lengthy discussion about what he's been up to in trying to get truck driving recognized as a trade, or at least a skilled occupation in the wake of the Humboldt tragedy. Mr. Wylie lives in Humboldt, Saskatchewan, and is intimately knowledgeable and adjacent to what happened there. And he started his group immediately in the wake of that terrible incident. He's been around trucking his entire life. He was suggested to me by my friend Trent Lalonde, who's likewise working pretty hard up there in Saskatchewan to make things better for truckers and everybody else on the road. So anyway, I'm very happy to bring you this chat. You have noticed I'm a little less active online at the moment. I'm trying to get this book done. Very difficult to do with young children and a wife who has a million commitments and a local family and in-laws, all the same. Everyone's running around with their hair on fire. And I don't get too much time to work on the book. So I have to make cuts elsewhere. But anyway, I hope you enjoy this show. It's very illuminating, and Mr. Wylie gives us a real good insight into the sort of battle to get the government to wake up and stop letting morons on the road, to put it mildly. As always, questions, comments, suggestions, corrections, and hate mail can be directed to gordilocks at protonmail.com. If you haven't already, head on over to my Substack where I write about truckers and podcast about trucking quite often, autonomoustruckers.substack.com. I'm sure Mr. Wylie is going to share this to his Facebook group. I would really appreciate anyone over there that hears this to, avail yourselves of all the information and output I've put on my Substack. Check out my podcasts. If you can, chip in some money towards the production of the book that'll be out at the beginning of next year. End of the Road, Inside the War on Truckers. I was very happy again to speak with Kim and Trent before him, and they will both be featured prominently in the book. All right, let's get to it. Kim Wylie, Trucking is a Trade. All right, good everybody. Welcome back to another fantastic episode of the Voice of Gord podcast. I'm Gord, and this is my voice. The other voice you're about to hear has come highly recommended to me by my good friend Trent Lalonde, former guest of the show, a longtime owner-operator, and Saskatchewan patriot. I interviewed Trent for the show a couple of years ago, and Trent's partner in crime here with this outfit in Western Canada called Trucking is a Trade is a gentleman by the name of Kim Wylie, who is from Humboldt, Saskatchewan, a name made infamous by the issues we are going to discuss this evening. The other voice you're about to hear, Mr. Kim Wylie.
Hey, Gord. Thanks for having me on.
Yes, sir. No, my pleasure. I've been trying to track you down here for a little bit now, and Trent hooked us up, and thank you, Trent. I'm sure you're going to listen. Trent speaks very, very highly of you and your guys' efforts, and I think we could have a very productive discussion about what's going on, what you're seeing in Western Canada, and tell the story of what went on at Humboldt, what we can do to fix things, and your efforts towards fixing things. Yeah, please introduce yourself. Let people know who you are, where you're from, where you're at, and what's happening.
Yeah, Kim Wylie from Humboldt, Saskatchewan. I was born out on Vancouver Island and in Victoria, 1972. My mom and dad moved us back to the farm in Norquay, Saskatchewan, where I grew up. I was 9 years old when we moved back to Saskatchewan. So, a farm kid, right? You know, as soon as you could walk, you were, put behind the steering wheel of something, right?
Yeah, many such cases.
Yeah, basically got the basics of driving large vehicles, before I was at the age of 10, right? You know, which I think helped me in my trucking career for sure. When you get the basics down, it's definitely helps. But I married a girl she's originally from Humboldt, and we've moved back there 30 years ago and raised our family there. And she's still got her mom and dad and her sister and cousins and stuff like that. And I've been with the same company. Only had 3 jobs in my trucking career, and I'm working on my third company. And I've been right as of right now, I'm working on 28 years with the same company. And
That's an increasingly rare statistic,
yeah,
sir.
yeah. So by the time 30 years rolls around, there I'll be 65. So that's probably when I'm going to get out of the flat decking industry and go find something else that's a little easier on my body. So we'll see what happens,
Right.
and
So, if you don't mind sharing, what's the name of the outfit you work for?
Lipset Cartage out of Regina.
Oh, wow. I believe
Yeah.
I believe there's a lady from Lipset who's a subscriber to my Substack.
Oh, that could be.
Yeah, I think I got an email from her once too. I'll have to go and check and make sure I send this directly to her. Lipsit's one of
Yeah.
these companies that I've always seen on the road. So even though I'm originally from Ontario, whenever I was running Western Canada, you'd even see them running around Toronto once in a while too. You'd see guys with like a step deck or a set of Super Bs or something from Lipset down here and then running back west. They've been around a long time.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, it's well owned, third generation now, right? Uh, they celebrated 60 years, I think, pretty close to 10 years ago. So they must be 65 or 70 years old now. Or is it? No, it was 50 years. That's what it was.
Yeah,
50
sort of.
years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the guys I worked for in Ontario, Earl Paddock Transport, they started in 1957. So yeah, about the
Yeah.
same.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Yeah.
so I I think we were talking on the phone there the other day. Lipset hauls out of a little steel mini mill there in Regina quite a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Raz. Yeah. 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 We got other customers too, like Var Steel and Russell. And I got Tega Forest products on now and Degelman Industries. And yeah, they've had customers for over 50 years, steady customers, right? So, yeah.
All right, where am I finding you right now? Where are you sitting? Where are you parked?
Oh, I'm down in Estevan here. I'm going to deliver some lumber to a modular home factory in the morning. So,
Oh, very good. Very
yeah,
good. So you mostly roam the prairies.
yeah, yeah. Three, the three prairie provinces, licensed for BC, hardly ever go there. Licensed for Ontario, hardly ever go there. So, no, it's good. Pretty
Yeah.
decent, actually.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, given my own personal politics and trying to avoid uh, any imperial entanglements, as Obi-Wan Kenobi once said, staying in Alberta and Saskatchewan is a good way to do that. Yeah, the further east and west you go, the more stupid things become. The scenery might be a nice change, but unfortunately, British Columbia and Ontario are ruled by the worst Canada has to offer, and you're probably better off staying where you're at.
Yeah. No, well, we got, enough freight east to west in the prairie provinces there to keep me out of trouble. So it's been good. Actually, this year has been pretty decent. Can't complain.
Oh, good. I like to hear good news because
Yeah.
it's usually bad.
Yeah.
So yeah, I brought you on here in part to share your guys' work with my listeners and your guys' insights into the sort of training side of things. One of my little bugaboos I like to complain about all the time is that they don't quite make truckers like they used to, and they let a whole lot of people in the business who shouldn't be. And you and Trent have started this organization, Trucking as a Trade, in order to advocate to change these things. So perhaps you could tell us a little bit about the genesis of trucking as a trade.
Well, I think how it all started, it was the bus crash happened on Friday, and I had to leave Sunday to go to Calgary. And I stopped twice before to try and voice my opinion. And finally, at Kindersley, there, I just had my mind made up. I stopped, I struggled, did a video, and then once I posted it on Facebook, I just shut my phone off. And I had texted a friend of mine at Linden, Alberta, and I said, I'm going to be in town tomorrow. I got to have a coffee with you. I needed to vent, right? So then he picked me up. We went for coffee, and I've been there quite a few times. So the guys at Coffee Row knew me and knew what happened, right? You know, and that was pretty much therapy for me to have people discuss what happened. And then I got back into the truck, turned my phone on, and one of my sons had texted me, and he says, "You need to check your Facebook page." And I texted back and I said, "Why?" Well, he says, "Your video went viral." I said, "What?" He goes, "Oh, yeah." And it was probably 2 hours later, Trent had phoned me and we got talking. And he had messaged me on Facebook before saying that we've met, a couple times. And it was the one time for sure I know it was over at Russell Metals, and him and I talked. And then he had phoned me a couple days later and explained to me, he says, uh, my suggestion would be is start flooding the politicians' emails and mailboxes with letters. He said, uh, it's free postage to the House of Commons in Ottawa, right? And I go, oh, okay, yeah. So, yeah, I don't know how many letters I wrote, got a couple of responses back. And then it just kind of snowballed from there, because in my video I called for making trucking a trade. And I went through all the mentors that I had over the years that steered me in the right direction. And there was three people that really stood out. It was my dad, my uncle, and then the guy. I worked for Butch Weber for 6 years, and I bought one of his old trucks off of him. And I still have that truck, a 1981 A model long hood Kenworth.
Nice.
And yeah, and he was probably my biggest influence. He explained to me about what to do in the trucking industry, money wise, right? He said, let the truck work for you. If you got to work for the truck, he says, it's time to get rid of the truck or find a different job, right? He explained, he said, you got 4 quarters in a month. He said, the first quarter is your truck payment, the second quarter is your maintenance, the third quarter is your fuel, and fourth quarter should be your take home money. Put that in the bank. He said, if you're running short on any one of those, he said, bite the bullet, get rid of the truck. He says, right? So he pretty much had everything all mapped out about how to make money in trucking. And he was good at it, like really good, you know. And I was really fortunate to have him, plus my dad and plus my uncle, right? I mean, my dad tried to talk me out of getting into trucking because he had heavy hauled and then run heavy equipment for years and then farmed. And then same with my uncle, he had trucked for years too. And they both of them pretty much tried to talk me out of it, but of course, you don't listen, right?
Yeah, no, my old man and my uncles tried to talk me out of it too.
Yeah, you know. So yeah, in my video there, I called for trucking needs to be a trade, and that's how it all got started, basically.
Right. So for the very few number of listeners I have that might not have heard about it, I mean, I've referenced this issue on my Substack a few times, although I haven't talked about it too much on the podcast because it's hard to discuss. Maybe we should give people a quick rundown of the Humboldt bus tragedy and what happened there.
Yeah, I got home. It was probably 5 in the afternoon, and 5 or 5:30, and I walk into the house, and my wife says, "Well, I just got a text," and she says, uh, "The Broncos bus has been involved in an accident," and she said, "That's all the information I got." And I said, "Well," I said, maybe a fender bender or a deer or something like that. And my daughter was home and she was getting ready to go to work. And she's working at a convenience store. Well, at 7 o'clock, she texted my wife and she was just tore right up. So my wife went and got her. And when they both walked into the house, I knew something was really bad because uh, she's the same age as some of the boys on the bus, right? She had 3 hockey players in her class, and that was a graduating class that spring. And she lost one. Another one's in long-term care, and another one's in a wheelchair. So she was texting back and forth with the players while they were riding the Nipawin. And then, of course, now you're being bombarded, right? Text, phone calls, social media. And again, I just turned my phone off because every time it dinged, it was bad news, you know. And that was a hard night. And the following day wasn't much better either. And I got quite a few texts, of support. I didn't answer any calls. I would just text and say thank you. And then my third son, he would play hockey every second year with these boys because he would move up. He was like a year older. And then my 2 other sons knew everybody, and my wife works at the schools, and she worked with one of the teachers. Her son was on the bus, and then here's me, a truck driver, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
In a small town of 6,000 people, you know everybody, and everybody knows you,
Yeah, I've
right?
driven through Humboldt. It is a small town.
Yeah.
And so this bus is carrying the town's hockey team, junior hockey team, from
Right.
Humboldt, Saskatchewan, north and east to another town called Nipawin.
Yeah.
For
They were in playoffs.
and there's an intersection
Yeah.
where the collision took place.
Yeah. Yeah. The highway runs east and west, that 3 numbered highway, and then the one that from Tisdale to Nipawin runs north and south. And that's at that intersection, that's where the accident happened. The semi was going west and the bus was going north. And there's a stop sign on the 3 numbered highway. So yeah, because the highway that runs north and south, that's the primary highway, right? The other one was basically a secondary highway, that one.
Right. So this collision, the investigation into it reveals a number of questionable decisions and questionable gaps in policy, questionable gaps in regulation. The truck that hit the bus was driven by a gentleman by the name of Jaskarat Singh Sidhu, heading westbound with a load of peat moss on a Super Bee, as I understand it.
Yep.
And for my American listeners and international listeners, a Super Bee is a Western Canadian colloquial term for something we call a B train, which is two trailers with a common fifth wheel, roughly 82 feet long by Canadian standards, and 140,000 pounds. So 63,500 kgs max weight. And this gentleman, Mr. Sidhu, by all accounts, had no business pulling this combination because apparently he only had 4 weeks of experience on the road, two of which were in training, and he'd only been on the road outside of training for about another 2 weeks. Do I have that correct?
Yep. Yep.
The issue that this incident revealed is that, well, it revealed a number of issues. One, there was nothing in law which prevented this from happening, as far as the licensure of Mr. Sidhu, nor the minimum amount of training. And also, some people have made a big deal about the fact that, and I'm sympathetic to this argument. The trucking industry in Canada, and especially in the United States, has been lying to itself for decades about a shortage of truck drivers, which is not true. There's never been a shortage. What it has is a retention problem, and the retention problem creates this belief on the part of industry, corporations, and the government that we need to bring more truck drivers in to fill the gaps created by all the people who quit, rather than fixing the reasons and the causes for why people quit. And so, in filling the gaps, they throw in all kinds of people into the trucking business who probably shouldn't be there, and or they get thrown in with not nearly enough training or oversight. And that's what happened with Mr. Sidhu. And he claims to have been looking in his mirrors, looking at his tarps flapping or something, and that's why he missed the stop sign. That's all irrelevant. Maybe he didn't. Nobody maybe taught him how to tarp loads properly. Who knows? But the overarching problem here is that we have this combination of no standards or function in law or regulation in law to enforce minimum training standards before someone like Mr. Sidhu gets behind the wheel of a vehicle they've got no idea how to drive and letting them on the roads. And so thus we have this tragedy. And now we have yourself and my friend Trent trying to do something about that. And thus your organization, Trucking as a Trade. And I'd like to know what you and Trent have been up to as far as trying to get the necessary changes made in regulation and legislation, and or even just public awareness about what's going on here.
Oh, well, yeah, public awareness, definitely through Facebook and social media. I follow a couple other organizations. There's Travis, they're Truckers for Safe Highways. He's out of Ontario.
Yeah, I'm aware of Travis.
Yeah, I follow him quite regularly. And then I'm always following, well, this is out of the States, would be CDL Life and then Truck News. I usually read articles that they've published.
Yeah, CDL Life is it's its own. They're their own kind of like media company and social media platform that's specializes in truckers. I,
Yeah.
I I I know their vice president, a guy named Charles Gracie. I've met
Oh,
Charles. Some of the CDL Life people are subscribers to my Substack.
oh, good. Yeah. Yeah, basically Facebook, right? I'm probably the biggest critic of the trucking industry right now. Well, I'd like to think I am, right? Because anything I see that in my mind needs to be exposed, yeah, I put it on Facebook, right?
So let's get into the particulars and the specifics here. On the question of training standards for truck drivers, specifically in Canada, I don't want to get like the United States involved here because you basically stay up north, but there's a lot of overlap, and so I'm curious to know in your advocacy and in your talking about this stuff, specifically where it regards the provinces and the feds in Canada. What have you found when you make proposals to them about increasing training standards, minimum number of hours, maybe where it interfaces with this newer sort of melt requirement that they've imposed? Like, how does that all look?
Well, I'll give you a good example because in 1981, I got my license, Class 1A license in Yorkton, Saskatchewan. It was a 5-day course. At noon on Friday, I walked out of there with a Class 1A. You know, probably 35 hours of training. That was it for $500.
Right, but
And
the difference though, I just before you carry on, I want to make note that we started this conversation off with the fact that you had already had tons of experience on the farm, right?
yeah,
And
oh yeah, yeah,
so even though in 1981 you only do 35 hours of course, that 35 hours is built on many years of you working on heavy equipment on a farm.
right. Oh yeah, yeah. No, it was good experience, right? And that's what's lacking now, right? Because there's the day of the farm boy is pretty much gone,
Right. Well,
right?
Mr.
Yeah.
Sadhu, and correct me if I'm wrong, from the bus incident, was in Canada on a student visa from India, and for all intents and purposes had zero experience with any heavy equipment or trucks or anything whatsoever before he went to whatever dodgy truck driving school he went to.
Apparently, he had 4 years of university. He's got a degree. He come out of university with a degree and got into trucking. There, I still can't wrap my head around that.
So
There's
I've
something going on there.
yeah, there is something going on there, and I have now spoken with two different people who are wise to what's going on, and this is going to tie into the immigration stuff a bit, which might make some
Uh,
people uncomfortable. However, it's the truth and needs to be said is that our immigration system is being abused by people that want to move to Canada. And one of the things they can do is if you come to Canada on a student visa or a temporary work visa, is you will get points or you will get further ahead towards getting a permanent residency card after spending a number of years in particular occupations. So
right.
if you move to Canada and you just want to live here and do whatever, if you go and be a truck driver first and then do that for X number of years, that's a credit to you in your permanent residency application. So there's a whole bunch of people moving to Canada that are going into the trucking industry, not because they want to be truckers, not because they were truckers wherever they came from with any experience to offer Canada. They're only doing it as a vehicle to get permanent residency. There's no, it's got nothing to do with anything else except that person furthering their own claim to permanent residency in the country. As somebody who's been in the trucking business my entire life, much like you have, whose identity is built around this, my dad did it, my uncles did it, my grandpa did it. I object to the government letting people get a license, get into my industry, screw it up, cause accidents, drive rates down, be a danger on the road, simply for those people to be able to get further along in their permanent residency. Like this loophole, this option needs to be shut off, I believe, because this is what happens. This is how you get Humboldts. Some
Yep.
guy who came to Canada on a student visa. I don't, whatever, I'm not saying any broader opinion about immigration. I'm very specifically saying that the trucking industry in Canada is being used by other people trying to immigrate to Canada for that purpose, and they've got no business in trucking.
Well, they're using it as a stepping stone to permanent resident,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
short. That's the
You know.
shorter way of saying my rant.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing that makes me mad about this is that my tax dollars go to sponsor all this stuff, right? So it's pretty much sponsoring the rate cutting and everything else going on, right? That affects my industry and my income. So I'm not really happy about that either, right? But
Right, and you have every right not to be. And I mean, over and above the rate cutting and the race to the bottom that flooding of any industry this results in, right? Like it doesn't necessarily have to be trucking. We see this with like
oh yeah,
all kinds of other industries. We've seen and read all the inquests and articles into the abuse of the temporary foreign worker program. I mean, before Trudeau stepped down, late last year in 2024, they said they were going to like look into what's going on with immigration and that it wasn't working. And this Mark Carney clown is, now trying to outflank the Conservative Party by saying, "Whoa, we got a problem with immigration." Yeah, you guys caused it. Thank you for catching up with the rest of us. But you know, trucking is very safety sensitive, right? Everybody drives. Other truck drivers have got a pretty good claim to wanting to have a safe work environment, and the roads are our working area, right? Like we are on the roads every day. You just spent all day on the road in Saskatchewan. Thousands of other truckers, millions across North America, on the interstates, on back roads, out in the bush, doing their thing. That is their workspace, right? It's also the workspace for bus drivers. It's also a space that we have to intermingle with four wheelers and people driving cars. And everyone's concerned about safety, right? Nobody wants to like get in an accident. Everybody wants to get to their location safely, right? And for the most part, most people are pretty safe drivers. I think the problem comes with the throwing people into the trucking industry who, maybe don't have the necessary training. And also, I want you to speak to something that I want to make sure that it's not only me that thinks this. There's a culture of driving, right? Like, you've been on the road for many years. We have like a cooperative thing, right? Like you get to an intersection and it's sort of ambiguous about who has the right of way. So someone waves somebody else through, someone passes you, you give them the lights. You know, someone's passing you in a governed truck and it's only going like half a kilometer an hour faster than you. Maybe you just say, "All right, I'm going to back out of it and let this guy over." There's a sort of cooperative culture, and you also respect the rules. You don't pass on double lines. You don't pass on blind corners. You just don't drive aggressively, right? Like a professional operator knows that like you get there when you get there, safety first. No load is worth anyone's life. But then there are people that don't understand that culture, right?
no, they don't. No, years ago, that's the way it was. You didn't pass through intersections or a double solid line, or you didn't pass anybody with oncoming traffic, or you're courteous. If there was a line of traffic behind you, a good example would be I'm going to Calgary from Saskatoon. There's 4 or 5 vehicles behind me at Kindersley. Well, at the last set of lights, I would pull over, let them go, right? Because I'm not a big speed guy. I'm more into it for fuel mileage, right?
Right. That's the
I
smart
know
thing.
for sure. Yeah, right. And I know for sure years ago, like all the old school guys, the mentors that I, had grown up with and showed me the ins and out of trucking, right? So if you did something stupid, like pass somebody in a double solid line, and you stop someplace, the guy that you passed would pull in behind you and more than likely give you a tongue lashing. And if he was in an even better mood, you might get beat, right? You just didn't do stuff like that. It never, now it, you know, the last 10 years, double solid lines don't mean anything. Passing through an intersection doesn't mean anything. And this includes everybody, four wheelers and truck drivers. It's just totally different out here now.
So you have all these observations, you have your decades of experience on the road. You've been very outspoken on Facebook. You and Trent have started this organization. Have you had any meetings with the government or petitioned them for anything? Who have you spoken with? Have you been able to relay what you just told me to them? Like, how does your government advocacy look?
Uh, it's not good. I've written my MLA. I've written, at that time it was, Scott Moe, right? You know, and then the opposition leader in Saskatchewan, I've written them. Even my MLA, I've written her, that was Donna Harpower at that time. And I've voiced my concern 3 times, and I've got a form letter back with a signature from her assistant saying, thanks for voicing your opinion. But nothing's ever done, right? It's, uh, I haven't given up on that. I'm still voicing my opinion, you know, then anybody will listen, but nobody in government has ever contacted me over that. It was probably after the bus crash, it was probably 2 months after the bus crash that Saskatchewan come out with the melt system, 120 hours of training. And then uh, I get a lot of private messages through Facebook. People would, I still get a lot of messages. And a woman had messaged me on Facebook and she explained who she was. And she says, I'm a trainer. I'm an, I'm an SGI trainer. I don't want to tell her name, but she's out of that game.
Right.
You know, she's she had confessed to me that the book that SGI uses is not up to date.
And
You
for
know,
my listeners who don't know, SGI is
Saskatchewan government insurance.
who also are in charge of the roads and licensing.
Oh yeah, well, training and licensing, and she had come up with a proposal probably about 5 years before the bus crash to update the training. So she had written this proposal, and I don't know what was in this proposal, but she took it to the higher ups and said, we haven't updated our training in 35 years. Maybe we should do that. And the higher up said, well, nobody in the public is crying about the training, so we're not going to do anything. So then about a month after the bus crash, well, then she did the proposal again, and she told me that the higher ups jumped all over it, right? Because now the public was voicing their opinion about truck driver training. So that's how they come up with 120 hours of melt, right? So it should have been updated 20 years ago, right? You know, with the amount of traffic going up and down the highways, now you got 4-lane highways across the province and into other provinces. The volume of traffic, truck traffic, and four-wheel traffic, it should have been updated from the 35 hours, right? 35 hours is nothing for training now.
Oh no, it's good God, no, it's nothing. No.
But yeah, I'm fortunate that I still have a lot of people private message me and say, hey, did you know? Did you know this about SGI? Did you know that about SGI? And then she was telling me that, you know, she was training with SGI's book. And she says, I know the book needs to be updated, right? Because it's all by the book. And then you've got uh, SGI final testers that do not have a class 1A and they have no over the road experience. So there's quite a few of us a little ticked about that too, right? So it's the more you find out, the more deeper you dig, the more, oh yeah, it just irks me some days to find out some information. But right, people are sharing this, and I'm happy that they're sharing it, right? So it kind of opens up a different perspective about the training and how which direction the training is going. And with trucking as a trade, we would work into this graduated licensing. If you wanted to pull 5-axle, or you got to go so many years and so many hours, and then you move up to a 6-axle or up to a 7 or 8 or Super B combinations, right? But I think that's how it's got to be. But then, like you said, the government and big business is always yelling there's a driver shortage. And like you said, it's got a lot to do with driver retention and driver pay. And we can all go back to where it all started was with deregulation in the early 80s, right? You know, I think that's where the driver pay got stalled. Because if you keep up with the cost of living, right, truck drivers basically now with the cost of living should be in around that 130 to 140. And I know guys that don't even crack 100 grand a year driving company
Yeah,
truck.
it depends. Like I said, there's little niches. Like if you're out in the oil field or you're doing something specialized, you can do that. But the sort of broader point is that the wages haven't kept up nor reflected cost of living. Also, truck drivers are denied overtime pay by government law, right? Like in the United States, there's the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938, which explicitly exempts transportation workers from overtime pay after 40 hours. So yeah, people get into trucking who don't know any better, and then come to find out that they don't get any overtime pay. Quite often, your delay time loading and unloading is not paid. You're only paid while you're moving. You only get paid by the mile. The mileage pay isn't that much. And then every delay, every problem, you just have to suck it up. And then, like, your truck breaks down. You're in a different part of the country. You miss all this time away from home, and the pay does not reflect all these sacrifices, but the economic forces want to keep pushing down. Nope, we don't want to pay people. We don't, there's a sort of class element to this too, where like our betters, the people that manage society, believe that like truck drivers are you know a different case to people. We don't have any qualifications, so therefore we don't deserve any of this money. And so if we won't do it, then, well, maybe these guys from India will. Maybe these kids that don't know any better will just cycle them through and keep throwing bodies at the problem instead of actually paying.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, yeah, it all comes back to pay. You know, I've been an owner operator since 1992. And I think the best year when I was a company driver, I made 40 grand. So that had to be mid 80s, I guess, right? You know, and that's way before logbooks, right? So yeah, you were run ragged, right? And 40 grand was about the best I ever did back then, you know. But yeah, still, it rates for owner operators now. I'm doing really good, actually. I got all my stuff paid for. It's all old, but it's well maintained because that's one thing you got to do is do the upkeep, right? And
Yep.
I don't have all the problems with the emissions and all that stuff either, you know. So I'm pretty steady. Uh, I take off between Christmas and New Year's. Haven't worked out in, I don't know, probably 20 years. And I always take 2 weeks off in February, you know, because I'm not a big fan of -40, but it is what it is.
Have you ever run the
Yeah.
ice? Did you ever go up north with Trent?
No, no, no. I missed that opportunity. No. Yeah, I'm not a big winter guy, right? Every winter, yeah, every winter it just gets harder and harder and harder for me to go to work. So it's yeah.
So speaking, okay, actually I want I'm glad you mentioned winter, Kim, because one of the interesting things about the situation with regards to training and new people getting cycled into the industry via these work visa scams and indentured servitude arrangements like we see in British Columbia is we have all these guys coming to Canada from India. And, I understand in the northern part of the country, when you get up towards the Himalayas, Nepal, and up towards Tibet and all that, well, it might get cold, but like they don't have winter in the way we do. And another a component to training specifically to Canada and like the northern United States and sort of higher elevation in the mountains is dealing with snow and chains, right? Chaining up to get over passes, chaining up to get out of situations. There's a whole different way you have to drive and approach the job and handle and understand your equipment at cold temperatures, which is not like something people get taught. Um, there was this incident in Texas I've highlighted on my Substack, and I've probably talked about it on one or two podcasts here now. This a collision, a big traffic pileup happened in Fort Worth. And it was the winter of 2021, and it was when this crazy snow and ice storm came through central Texas. And a gentleman working for one of these sort of like, uh, bottom feeder contractors that was working for a load broker based not in the United States, got a load hauling a FedEx trailer. And this guy crashed into a bunch of stop traffic because he was coming up a hill and thought, well, I better keep mashing on it to get up the hill. But, black ice, a bunch of the other lanes, there's all stop traffic. The gentleman behind the wheel didn't clue in that maybe he should have been slowing down. And then, proceeded to run right into the back of stop traffic, killed two people. Turns out the gentleman driving the truck was from Haiti, which is an island in the Caribbean, or half of the island of Hispaniola. Uh, Went to a dodgy ass truck driving school in Florida, got his CDL in 3 weeks. No winter training. He admitted it. He's like, they never taught me to drive in the winter. I've never seen snow. Right. So the question of winter training and winter operations and dealing with equipment in the wintertime, especially in extreme cold like you get on the prairie and then up in the far north. Do you have some comments on that?
Well, I got a maintenance routine on this truck here. Every second year, I change the air compressor and air dryer. Right? Yeah, because you can have problems with both. I mean, after being froze up once, that was enough, right? And
Do you have
now
a
you're fighting.
do you have an alcohol evaporator on your air system?
No, I don't. No, it's just an air dryer,
Right.
but
Is that
still.
it? Yeah, because a lot of guys will have an alcohol evaporator, but I guess if you stay the benefit with an alcohol evaporator is that your air system, let's say you're a Canadian carrier in Saskatchewan or Ontario or whatever, and it's February and it's 20, 30, 40 below, and then you haul a load to Florida or Texas and it warms right up. Then you turn around and you drive back home. And now you have all that nice warm air in your system that may have deposited moisture into your air system while you were in the warmer climate. And then you drive up north into the colder climate. The problem is that all of the air in your system and in your air tanks may have collected moisture that is already past your air dryer, and then now you're in the really cold temperature. So this is where the sort of advantage to having an alcohol sniffer is, right? So it cleans all that stuff up.
Yeah. Well, I had one on my old truck because I didn't have an air dryer.
Right.
And it worked. It worked really good. I mean, you drained your tank as soon as you got into the shop. You left your truck in the shop, overnight, Friday night, Saturday morning. Open up all your valves, drain all your air tanks, fill up your alcohol sniffer, right? And you're good for the rest of the week. You know. But yeah, I do that every second year. As soon as uh, my plates run out in September, and that's when I switch trucks.
Right.
So this truck, in mid-September, I would change the air compressor and the air dryer both at the same time every second year, right? Plus drain tanks every weekend, right? Because my truck doesn't sit outside plugged in; it gets a warm shop every weekend, you know. So that's one of my routines there is just keep up on your maintenance because uh, I was gone for the first 2 weeks of February and it was minus 40 below. And when I got back, I asked dispatch, well, how was it? Well, he says, in between froze up trucks and froze up trailers and everybody breaking down and tow bills and everything else. And I said, guess I didn't miss much. And he goes, no, you didn't miss anything, he says, right? So,
Yeah, no, certain times of year you just don't bother. And speaking of the tow bills, never mind the equipment, right? So we just talked about, you have to do extra maintenance and you have to be mindful of your air system and all that. And, things break easier in the cold. You also have to drive differently. You also have to be able to have some judgment about when to park it. And a lot of this comes down to training. And if you, again, I come back to our friends from the subcontinent, if you've just shown up in BC through some kind of employment scam, you get to Vancouver, you go to some dodgy truck driving school. Now they send you over the Rocky Mountains and you're driving across the prairie. You're from the Punjab. You might not speak English. You may have never seen snow before, and now here you are piloting a truck across Saskatchewan, and it's minus 35 and blowing snow and all the rest of it. Um, as far as the trucking is a trade thing, like winter operations, like how much of a component do you think in a training program does winter ops have to be?
oh, it's huge. I always gauge, okay, it's minus 20 and it's snowing. Well, at minus 20, snow's not going to stick to the road. There's no moisture in it. The road is not warm. Usually you get that in the late fall. The highway is still warm and you get a blanket of snow. Well, the highway will melt the snow, cause it to ice. As soon as you drive over it, right? It'll squish the water out, turn it to ice. Same thing in the springtime. You'll get that April snowstorm and it'll turn just to glare ice, But at minus 20, minus 30, if it's snowing, it's not, at least it's not sticking to the road. As long as you got good visibility, right? I kind of judge it on that. It's been quite a few years since I've been storm stayed someplace overnight or for a day, right? I've always been fortunate enough. Either I'm sitting in the shop at home or we have a shop and a yard in Regina, right? So it's been quite a few years. But I mean, good example of that, when the Globe and Mail come out with that article, uh, I think it was Kathy Tomlinson that did the investigation on that. And it was the guys looking for the resident card that got, into the trucking industry and then, was hired by a shady company. And he inquired about, well, what about tire chains? And his boss said, well, don't worry about it. He says, if you get into the chain up area, he said, some other truck driver will come and help you put chains on, right? Don't worry about it. So that should be
Wow.
part of that's got to be part of the training too. I mean, if you're going to be running BC or Pacific Northwest, right? You need that additional training, winter training, chain up, at least chain up anyways, right? You know, there's got to be additional training on top of your driver training, at least for that. You know, we could get into load securement and all kinds of other different training, you know. But we had a couple guys that had, you know, that had come out of the driving school, and Lipset had them partner with another driver. And this other driver, well, he pretty much just runs Saskatchewan and a little bit of Manitoba. So then, and he lives in Regina. So they partnered them with him. So they would do day trips up to Hudson Bay and back, or up to Prince Albert and back with loads of lumber, and, you know, and then they told these guys, well, we need you to commit for a year, right? We'll give you the additional training to be with our company guy on day trips, but then you've got to stay with us for a year, because, you know, we need something out of this. We're not just going to train you and say, okay, now you're good, and you take off and go work for a different company, right? No, you need to commit at least 12 months to us. And there's still one guy left out of that training. The two other guys that moved on after a year, right? You know, so they've done that aspect too, is in-house training, you
As
know.
you bring up a very interesting quandary that companies like Lipset find themselves in, again, because of the sort of churn problem, right? When guys are cycling through companies and quitting, it makes it hard for, you know, those that want to do right by the industry to put in all the effort, time, and cost to train someone properly, and then just have them quit and get poached or go work somewhere else. And then you lose them. Like, you just lose all that effort in training them. And again, I lay this at the feet of the retention and churn problem that is this, like, it's like a self-flicking ice cream cone, you know, or a dog that's chasing his tail. We don't have enough drivers. Okay, well, we get new ones, but then we don't do anything to fix the industry. We don't pay people more. They don't stay. They quit. Now we need more drivers, and everything goes around and around and around in a circle. And then one of the consequences of that is that nobody wants to spend the time to properly train people so that they know what they're doing, because training comes with a cost.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, because there's we have two propane outlets in Humboldt, and I've had people from both of those companies. I know them, right? You know, they're local guys. They work over there. And the one guy, I had coffee with him here a couple of years ago, and he's trying to convince me, well, when you retire, you can come over here and work. And I go, well, yeah, I'll see what happens. And he says, well, he says, yeah, if you come over here, he says, you gotta spend, you know, 5 days in Lethbridge. And I go, 5 days in Lethbridge? Well, yeah, they want you trained, right? They want you trained properly in how to handle propane, right? Oh, okay, yeah, yeah, you know, so, and he's telling me, yeah, you know, they give you a meal allowance and put you up in hotel rooms and pay for your gas to drive down there, and then train you, and, you know, how to operate the truck. And then everything is e-billing now, right? You know, you submit it on email and then print the bill out, and everything is electronically done through the truck. So, you know, he's telling me this, and he says, in that 5 days, he said, with everything included, he said it costs that company $8,000 to have you trained. I go, holy crap. Well, he says they don't want any incidents, right? You know, I go, well, yeah, I get that, right? And he says, well, then he says, uh, we're not going to train you for 5 days and have us, you know, eat $8,000 for you to go over to the competition 6 months later, right? And I go, no, I said, I'm pretty much going to have to commit to you guys for at least a year, right? And he goes, well, yeah, hopefully, right? And like you said, you know, it's not cheap. right? But what's the cost of an incident though? That could be million and plus dollars, right?
Yeah, no, I hauled propane for a couple of years. I know what that's all about. I never had to go and take a course, probably because I hauled fuel before that and I already had my hazmats and I was sort of familiar with it. And I'd hauled anhydrous ammonia when I was out in Saskatchewan. Did a couple of seasons doing the juice. So I guess my propane training was a little cheaper, but yeah, I get it. When you take someone that's a greenhorn and ask them to start hauling hazardous materials, that's a big step. And you want to make sure that they know exactly what they're doing every single step of the way.
Yeah, because I started out with gravel. That's what I did. I had my license that summer, 1981. I did RM work there, belly dump, doing RM roads. And then I got hooked it up with the guy at Moose Jaw, and we went up north and stockpiled for 4 months. So that was December right over till April. And then that same guy worked for him out of Moose Jaw there, hauling gravel, rebuilding Saskatchewan highways I was with him for about 5 years. And then one guy on the crew there, he went to work for a company out of Regina called Harv Wilkening, and they were contracted to Esso. They hauled Esso fuel out of Regina. They had 4 trucks doing that, and
I
then they hauled.
I recognize the name Wilkening.
Yep. Oh yeah, yeah. And then they had office up in Edmonton there, and they hauled packaged oil products to all the Esso bulks in Saskatchewan. So I was up in Edmonton there for probably 4 years driving a company truck, and it was all hand bomb, but you had ramps and wheelers when you got to the other end, to the Esso agents, and it was multi-drop. And then Butch Weber was, at that time, he had 4 trucks running there. And he had one of his drivers in Regina say, "Yeah, I'm moving on." So Butch had come to me and said, "You can come and drive my truck, but you got to move back to Regina." Well, at that time, I've had enough of Edmonton. So I moved back down to Regina, drove for Butch for 6 years, and then bought the truck that I was driving from him in 1992. And I stayed on with Welkening. And then the oil contract come up for bids, and the company out of Fort Saskatchewan, Alberta, by the name of Ashton Transport, had got the contract. So Butch and I and a couple other guys went over to Ashton, hauled the lube oils out of there, and then 3 years down the road, Wilkening got it back. So then we went back there, and then 3 years down the road, Kindersley took everything. So then I was looking for a job, and that's when I got hooked up with Lipset here in '97, and I've been here ever since. So as an owner operator, so I really haven't moved around all that much, to tell you the truth.
No, there's another issue with trucking again that ties into the retention thing is the grass is always greener.
Yep.
I knew a guy in Ontario who had 17 or 18 jobs across the span of 2 or 3 years, and it's just like, what are you doing? Like it's not
Yeah.
it's not going to change that much.
No. No, and every time you move, it costs you money, right?
And it
Like your
costs the people
insurance.
you work for money. And this is the
Right.
problem is like the bean counters in an effort to try and save money by suppressing everybody's wages, they're also forgetting the onboarding costs and the costs of quitting, and then the externalized costs, right? So all these new guys that keep coming into the industry that aren't getting trained properly end up in the ditch, and then we all have
Yep.
to pay for it with higher insurance premiums, and then society
Yep.
has to pay for it through accidents. And then Canada has a socialized medicine system, and all these people end up in the hospital after all these smash ups or dead. So there's all these
Right.
costs associated with the cheap freight, keep churning through driver shortage narrative retention problem that just offloads all of the costs that would be saved by just keeping better, higher experienced drivers happy so they don't quit and just pay them more and keep them around. But they just won't do it. I mean, some
No,
companies
well,
will.
no.
Apparently, Lipsit will. Um,
Yeah, right. Yeah. It-
Lipsit's kind of in a league like the guys I worked for in Ontario paddocks. They pay their guys well, but the problem is that like these are the small family owned companies where everyone's operating in reality, and they are not the majority of the industry, right? So,
right. Yeah. Yeah.
so on that note, you and Trent's efforts have they been received well in the industry at all? Like, do you get any help from trucking companies? How do you work with any of the associations, whether they be provincial or the Canadian Trucking Alliance, or like, is there anyone trying to like help you guys out or recognizing you for your efforts or working with you at all?
No, I've never been contacted by STA, Saskatchewan Trucking Association. No, never heard nothing from them. But on a good note, Alberta has come up with a guideline to do apprenticeship in the industry. That was announced last summer that they had come up with guidelines about graduated licensing and in the industry after the melt. And now I can't remember who announced that, whether it was the Alberta Trucking Association that got into that or what, but additional training anyways with graduated licensing. And I heard about it and looked into it, and I haven't heard anything since. So I don't know what's going on with that. But no, there's been no associations contacted us. It's been Facebook groups, definitely Facebook groups. That's
Right.
that's
So I'm curious. It's okay. So the thing that I'm having a little trouble wrapping my head around here is the import of the Humboldt tragedy. And you're right there. You live in Humboldt. Your family and extended community network are heavily involved in this. It was a wake up call for the entire country. It made news coast to coast to coast. People still talk about it today, and it's been 7 years later. And I'm a little bit like thinking to myself, everyone knows what the problem is. You and Trent and a number of others have been discussing the problem and the associated problems and the underlying problems and the reasons why this has gone on. I would have thought Saskatchewan would have been ground zero for trying to deal with it, given the Humboldt situation.
yeah. Well, every once in a while, like in Saskatchewan, you need to have a Class 5 license for 3 years before you can qualify to get a Class 1A. Well, there was, how do I word this without, I guess, offending people, but there was a certain group that claimed to have a truck driver shortage. So they went to the government and proposed, you know, we can bring people in and train them, but they don't have a Class 5 license. And I don't know how they found out about it. Oh, I know what it was. It was the it had to do with seasonal workers, seasonal immigration workers that were going to be brought in to help the farmers spring and fall. And apparently there was a clause in there that the government had said that, okay, yeah, you don't need to have a Class 5 license. But then I was contacted by, there's a group of the Humboldt families that have stuck together. And then one of them had phoned me about this. And I said, no, I said, that's, Saskatchewan says you need to have a class 5 license for at least 3 years before you can, get a class 1. And I said, that's just wrong, right? I mean, you got no license at all. You're going to go through the training, the driver training, and get a class 1. And I said, no, I said, you know, I'm not in favor of that at all. I said, that just opens up another door. So then the group of Humboldt families there voiced their opinion to the Saskatchewan transport minister, and he listened, right? So this certain group, got denied over this uh, exemption for the class 5 license for 3 years, right? So the government did listen on that one. And
Hallelujah.
yeah, you know,
Yeah, the thing is
yeah,
like one of the like one of the contradictions or hypocrisies, maybe is a better word we see, is everyone's all about safety, safety, safety. We got to be safe. The roads have to be safe. We want everyone to go home. We don't want another Humboldt tragedy. We don't want any insurance claims. Safety, safety, safety. It gets beat into our heads. Safety, safety, safety. One of the best things that can guarantee safety on the road is experience and being taught properly and having a lot more training. But when it comes to freight, when it comes to transportation, when it comes to moving things around the country, and the critical role this plays in the economy, and the safety factor gets thrown out the window. They just believe that they can pull any moron with a pulse off the street and turn them into a truck driver in a very short amount of time. And then all of their concerns about safety are proven to be lies or bullshit or both, because safety costs money. If you want the best way to have safe drivers is to have happy, well paid, well rested drivers that are the captains of their ship and are highly experienced and have the judgment to say, nope, it's that April snow that's going to turn into black ice, glare ice. I'm not driving. No, I'm not going to pass on this double line. No, I'm going to tell my dispatcher, I don't care how fast the customer wants it. The conditions are such that I can't drive quickly, and I'm not going to exceed my hours of service. I'm not going to be bullied and pushed around. So the best and safest drivers are the most highly experienced ones that have the best judgment built up over time and through experience. Yet the government does everything they can to make those guys' lives more difficult and to set the economic conditions that nobody sticks around the industry long enough to become those highly experienced, good judgment drivers, because they're having to compete with morons constantly and they're not being paid enough, so they quit. So people get a
yep,
license, they're in and out of the industry within a year or two. They do not become that better driver with better judgment and a better safety record. They just don't last. So what's the disconnect here? I mean, obviously, we can say it's money, but like there has to be something else going on here. Is it a classism thing? Is it just they don't care thing? I understand a lot of it comes down to money and not wanting to pay people, but then we pay for it in all these other ways with crashes and higher insurance and onboarding costs. So something tells me there's something else besides money going on here. Kim, what do you think?
yeah. Well, in that Globe and Mail write up, that Kathy did, she said majority of the immigrant truck drivers that come here to get a permanent residence card, as soon as they get that residence card, a certain percentage of them just get right out of the trucking industry, right? Because they're not in it, you know, they were forced into it and they want to just get out. So as soon as they get that residence card, they're gone. right? So now you have, another sort of driver turnover, well, we all know that's not true, driver shortage, right? But uh, that's the only thing I ever wanted to do was drive a truck, right? Either drive a truck or farm, right? And I figured, well, yeah, I'll do it for a summer, right? Well, now look, 43 years later, still doing it. But yeah, you got to want to do it, right? It's, I'm home every weekend, right? I've been fortunate that way. I'm not gone. I'm only gone for 4 or 5 days, you know. But yeah, I guess it's more like a calling, right? When you think about it. And then you have the other aspect there. Well, a lot of guys, as soon as they get that residence card, they're out. So, now they don't have the years of experience. And, we don't have the farm boys and farm girls anymore, with that experience. So where does that leave the rest of us, eh? And I see it every day, and it's pretty much distracted driving, you know. I mean, even on the 4 lane, I'm always watching the traffic behind me because I never know when I'm going to get rear-ended. And then when they're in the left lane, I don't know whether or not I'm going to get sideswiped, right? It's just, I don't know. It's just a different style of driving that I'm not used to, right?
Right.
So
Well, what you're doing is, I call it full situational awareness. So I'm very much in agreement with you that you can never be too careful, especially with the distracted driving people and the people that don't know what they're doing. So when I'm even in my pickup going down the road or my wife's Prius, doesn't matter what I'm driving, even when I was still logging, yeah, always looking at the mirrors to see who's coming up beside you, behind you, what's going on ahead, constantly paying attention. You have to pay so much attention to make up for the people that pay none, right?
yeah, yeah.
So, and that's something I think they need to teach people more too, right? Like I remember when I went to go get my license when I was 18, I was running around with a local guy at paddocks by the name of Ed Watkins, and something that Ed said to me when I was a young guy back then has stuck with me my entire life. And he said, you're not just driving for yourself; you have to drive for everybody else around you. He said that's just the way it is. You have to assume that everyone else is stupid and drive over and above for yourself. You have to drive for them and be able to guess what they're doing and avoid things and see patterns in traffic and see behaviors before they manifest into colliding with you or getting you tied up with things. You have to drive for other people because other people don't drive very well, and that piece of advice has served me very well.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. Well, we've got a safety bonus incentive program that pays, you know, uh, every quarter, right? So it goes off your gross revenue that you generate in 3 months, and it's a good bonus, right? Holy man, I tell you, and it it really makes you think. Okay, uh, all I have to do is screw up, and my safety bonus is gone, right?
Right.
You know, and it pays some decent money. But years ago, my uncle worked for bigger carriers, right? He worked for Cairns out of Edmonton when old Ed still owned Cairns Transport, and he did a stint over at Trimac too, you know. And I was up there visiting him that one week, and he said, "Well, Cairns is putting on a defensive driving course." He says, "Do you want to come to that?" And I said, "Well, yeah, sure, right." So after sitting in there for 2 days about defensive driving, oh, wow, yeah, that was an eye opener, right? And a lot of those bigger family owned companies, like you said, were safety, 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 right? Because if you're safe, you know, basically you're going to get a better rate in insurance, you know, and that's what it all boils down to over at Lipsit here too, right? You know, is that they're constantly, you know, even with the e-logs now, right? Whatever the e-log is telling you to do, right? You know, because if you run over hours or uh, do something on an e-log, right, that goes against your safety bonus, and they're big on that, you know. And they've always said, okay, if you run out of hours daily, and if you're going to be late, we can always reschedule, you know, an appointment. That's all you got to tell them. And I've done that quite a few times, right? Well, you got your appointments for 7. Well, I'm not going to be there at 7. I'll be there at 8:30. Yeah, we'll phone and change your appointment. Okay, no, that's good, right? So they work with you. You know, they have to work with you now on e-logs. And that's probably another thing there too, is that everybody's racing that clock nowadays with an e-log.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan. The year after e-logs came out in the United States, the statistics bore out that they actually caused more problems than they saved. Aggressive driving went up, hours of service charges went up, accidents, collisions, all the things increased because the e-log didn't do anything to solve the incentive problem, which is the pay by mile structure and the fact that guys are getting held up everywhere all the time, right? Your detention and waiting to get loaded and unloaded, and you're not getting your maximum driving time in. So now e-logs come in, you can't fudge things anymore or move the hours around on paper. So you drive like a maniac. And what happens when you drive like a maniac? You run into people, you get speeding tickets, you brake harder, it's harder on the equipment, it's less safe. And yeah, I am not uh yeah, I think the e-log thing was band-aid for a shotgun wound. They're not dealing with the actual problem. So instead of dealing with the actual problem, which would cost money and have to get the facilities we interface with to change their tune and get trucks loaded and unloaded faster, and then pay guys for their waiting time. That would increase safety because now nobody has to rush, but they don't want to pay for that, because
No,
there's a belief that if you pay a driver by the hour, he's just going to be lazy and stopped at the coffee shop and nothing's going to get done and we're going to lose production. I think that's baloney. I've been paid by the hour and I work the same getting paid by the hour as I work getting paid by the mile because I know what safe speed is and I know what production means. Um, but there's again, they make assumptions, and then there's also classism, right? Like the owners of companies, oh no, it can't. What do you mean pay a truck driver that much? They're not worth that. They're just a truck driver, right? So
yeah. Well, I think that's the way it was years ago because you heard the old truck drivers are a dime a dozen, right? When I got my license in 1981, that was, you heard quite a few guys saying that. Well, it's not like that anymore, right?
no,
You
and
know,
that attitude has come home to roost.
yeah,
Um,
you know,
and that's
the
why Highway 17 and 11 in Northern Ontario are death traps, and the 401 is a death trap, and Highway 1 going through BC is a death trap because they memed that belief system into existence, and that's what they got. And look what it's costing everybody in lives and damage and carnage and money and all the rest of it. Um, Kim, I've had you here for nearly an hour and a half. I've appreciated your wisdom and stories here greatly. Is there anything you wanted to leave people with before we go?
uh, geez, uh, well, to tell you a little bit of a story there, I was at the Flying J in Saskatoon, and there was a guy parked on the outside there, on the very outside of the row, and a guy was turning left, and he pretty much run over the guy that was parked. Using his trailer, he run over the left side of the guy's truck. Eh? So the guy with the trailer there had bent the axle, and this really surprised me because I know the guy that was doing the recovery there with the tow truck, right? So he was in the process of taking the wheels off the trailer because the axle and suspension was bent, and he was going to chain it up and then get this guy to move. So the guy that had the truck parked there, moose bumper wrecked, fender wrecked, tire wrecked. So there's probably half a dozen guys standing around there. So I'm giving the tow truck driver a hand doing all this. And I'm within earshot of these six guys talking, eh? Right. And right out of the blue, this caught me off guard. One guy says, man, they really need to make this industry a trade. And this was probably about 2 years after the bus crash, eh? Because there was in my video there, about 99% of the people agreed with me. The industry needs to be a trade, but then you get that 1%, right? And of course, I took the 1% comment the wrong way, right? And my wife, she explained that to me. You've got 99% of the people agreeing with you, but that 1% will always bring you down. I go, yeah, you're correct. So then when that guy said that, the six guys standing around there, and the one guy said, yeah, this really needs to be turned into a trade. And that really caught me off guard. And then the guy that was driving the truck that run over the other truck, I was talking to him. And I asked him, I said, back then I would ask, how many years experience do you have? He says, 11 months. And I looked at him and I said, 11 months? He goes, yeah. I go, oh boy. I said, can you do something for me? He goes, what? I said, can you go back to your company? And I said, and ask them for additional training, right? Just ask them for additional training. Hopefully they give you more training, right? He says, yep. He says, I'm going to do that. I said, okay. I said, thank you. So you have that situation there too, which is, that really caught me off guard. So I texted Trent an hour after that and I said, you know what? I said, I think it's starting to catch on. And he goes, yeah. He says, with the Facebook posts, say there's quite a few other people saying that trucking needs to be a trade. And I go, yeah. I said, a lot of people were bucking that idea there, but I said, after a couple of years, it kind of starts to grow on people. And now it's, I've had a lot of people private message me and say, yeah, no, I think this is going in the right direction. It's just got to catch on. And then when Alberta announced the apprentice driver graduated licensing there last summer, okay, yeah, we got the ball rolling here, but it just kind of stalled a little bit. But I think a lot more people are starting to catch on. But we need the government to listen. But yeah, that's another thing that we got to contend with, eh? So yeah.
Yeah, we got that
Yeah,
problem down here in the States. There's pretty ample evidence that the previous administration and various states were working to dilute minimum standards to get a CDL. They waived the English proficiency. You don't
right.
even you don't
Yep.
even you don't even need to live in states anymore, and they just hey, whatever, here's your CDL. And the people in the Trump administration have been pretty slow on the uptake, and that's very frustrating.
Well, probably what the government is that the government changes every 4 years, except for Canada. We've had 9 years of the same government, right? And, in that 9 years, you could have done something proactive to benefit the trucking industry, but you haven't,
No,
right?
no, Rainbow Socks Magoo there
Yeah.
certainly always worried about, diversity and treating people from other countries properly. Did nothing about an indentured servitude arrangement, which was throwing brown bodies into industry that killed a lot of them and mangled a bunch more.
Yep.
And has they've done nothing about it because people were making money. So
Well, yeah, somebody was making money off of that. Yep.
uh, anyway, Kim,
But yeah,
where can people find you online, sir?
well, on Facebook, my Facebook page, Kim Wylie. Yeah, that's probably about it.
So
Yeah.
you guys also have don't you guys have a trucking as a
Well,
trade page as well?
oh yeah, trucking is a trade page. Yep, on Facebook too. Yep. Oh yeah, yeah, that page too. So
And Kim Wylie, Wylie.
yeah, yep.
And if they're out trucking across the prairie, what's your truck look like? How people can wave you down?
Oh well, my old A model there is white with blue fenders, and my winter truck here is just a solid blue W900L model. So yeah, lips it on the door on both of them. So
All right. Well, everyone keep
yeah,
an eye out for Kim. If you see him out there, wave and say hello. And maybe you might see him in Humboldt, pull in and have a coffee and talk about trucking and learn from a good old timer that knows what's going
yeah,
on.
yeah. I'm always home on weekends. Private message me. I'll meet you for coffee at Tim's.
All right, Mr. Wylie, thank you very much for your time and your insight and wisdom, and for all of your efforts towards getting trucking recognized as a trade in Canada, sir. It's a very noble effort.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Gordon. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. All right, sir. Way of the road.